The massive space station called Nexus Prime floated quietly in the darkness of space, surrounded by stars that seemed to mock its desperate situation. For 100 days straight, a special signal had been shooting out from the station, traveling faster than light itself, reaching every corner of the galaxy with the same urgent message: "Help us. Please, someone help us." Commander Thalis stood at the huge window that looked out into space, his alien features twisted with worry. He had 4 arms, pale blue skin, and eyes that could see things humans never could. But right now those powerful eyes only saw emptiness. His people, the Kaleth, had been sending their cry for help across the entire galaxy, and nobody had answered. Not a single response, not even a "we can't help you" message. Just silence. Behind him, his assistant walked over on 6 legs, moving slowly like someone carrying terrible news. The assistant's tentacles, which normally moved with purpose, now hung down sadly. "Sir," the assistant said in their musical language, "we've checked all the communication channels again, still nothing. No civilized world has responded to our beacon." Thalis felt his heart sink even lower. 7 different alien species had joined together long ago to form the Kaleth Confederacy. They were peaceful people who loved art, science, and learning. They built beautiful cities, created amazing technology, and lived in harmony for thousands of years. They had never hurt anyone. They had never started wars. They only wanted to explore space and make friends with other intelligent life. But none of that mattered now. The Vorthak swarm was coming. The Vorthak were like a disease that spread across space. They weren't really alive in the way most people understood life. They were more like machines that could think but only thought about one thing: consuming everything. They ate planets, turning entire worlds into fuel for their endless hunger. They didn't negotiate. They didn't take prisoners. They just arrived, ate everything, and moved on to the next world. In just 6 months, the Vorthak had completely destroyed 43 different planets. Each world had millions, sometimes billions of people living on them. Families, children, artists, scientists, farmers, all gone. Turned into nothing but energy to feed the swarm's growth. The Confederacy had tried to fight back, but their weapons were designed for defense, not for the kind of total war the Vorthak brought. Now Nexus Prime was all that remained. It was their last fortress, their final hope. But the defense fleet, protecting it, was tiny compared to what was coming. Thalis had run the numbers 1,000 times, and they always came out the same way: 50 Vorthak ships for every 1 Confederacy vessel. It wasn't a battle, it was execution. The worst part wasn't dying, though. The worst part was dying alone and forgotten. In all their years of peaceful contact with other species across the galaxy, the Confederacy had made many friends. Or so they thought. But when the desperate call went out, when they begged for any kind of help, the galaxy had turned its back on them. Thalis closed his primary eyes and prepared for the end, wondering if anyone would even remember that the Kaleth Confederacy had ever existed. Officer Kelrix had been working at the communications station for 72 hours straight, his 6 eyes burning from staring at empty screens. The Kaleth didn't need as much sleep as some species, but even they had limits. He had dozed off at his post, his head resting on his secondary arms, when the crackling sound jolted him awake. At first, he thought it was just more interference from the nearby star's magnetic field. The same static that had been mocking them for over 3 months, but then he heard something different, patterns in the noise that didn't belong to nature. His training kicked in, and his tentacles flew across the control panel, trying to clean up the signal. What came through was unlike anything in their databases. The voice started speaking in pure mathematics, not words but numbers and equations that somehow formed meaning. It was primitive but clever, like someone trying to prove they were intelligent before attempting real conversation. Then suddenly, the voice switched to Galactic Standard, the common language used for trade and diplomacy across known space. But this wasn't the smooth, educated Galactic Standard spoken by diplomats and merchants. This was broken, rough around the edges, like someone had learned it from old recordings rather than proper teachers. The accent was completely unfamiliar, and some of the words were pronounced in ways that made Kelrix's translator struggle to keep up. "This is Captain Han from Earth," the voice said with a confidence that seemed almost absurd given the circumstances. we received your call. Help is coming. Maintain position. Kelrix's hearts nearly stopped. After 100 days of silence, someone had actually answered. He scrambled to record the transmission and immediately sent it to Commander Thalis, who arrived at the communications center so fast he must have teleported. "Play it again," Thalis ordered, his forearms crossed as he listened intently. The message was short, maybe 15 seconds total, but every word carried weight. What struck Thalis most wasn't what the voice said, but how it said it. There was no fear, no hesitation, no questions about what they were getting into, just a simple statement of fact. Help was coming. "Earth?" Thalis muttered, accessing their star charts and databases. He searched through thousands of catalogued worlds but found nothing. No planet called Earth appeared in any Confederacy records, no species called humans. No Captain Hun. It was as if these people existed in some corner of the galaxy that civilized space had never discovered. "Could be pirates," suggested Tactical Officer Vren, his scales changing color with worry. "Sometimes scavenger fleets monitor. Distress calls hoping to claim salvage rights after everyone dies." But Thalis shook his head. He had dealt with pirates before, and they didn't sound like this Captain Han. Pirates were sneaky, always looking for angles and advantages. This voice was different, direct, honest, almost casual about charging into a hopeless battle against impossible odds. "Run a trace on the signal's origin," Thalis ordered. When the results came back, his eyes widened. The transmission had come from a region of space considered empty by Confederacy mappers. Whoever these humans were, they lived far from the known civilized worlds, but they were coming anyway. Space around Nexus Prime suddenly filled with new ships as 18 human vessels materialized from hyperspace, their arrival sending shockwaves through both fleets. But these weren't the sleek warships that Admiral Zenth had desperately hoped for. Instead, what appeared before his eyes looked more like a collection of space junk than a rescue fleet. Captain Lee Day stood on the bridge of his ship, the Soul's Pride, watching the massive Confederacy vessels through his scratched viewport. His ship had once been a deep space mining vessel, built to crack asteroids and haul ore across solar systems. Now it bristled with makeshift weapons, mining lasers converted to military use, cargo bay doors reinforced with armor plating welded on by hand, and missile tubes that had been cargo containers just weeks ago. Around him, his crew worked at stations that still smelled like machine oil and industrial coolant. These weren't career military officers in crisp uniforms. They were miners, engineers, cargo haulers, and mechanics who had volunteered when Earth received the Confederacy's desperate call. Most of them had never fired a shot in anger, but they had all spent years fighting the harsh realities of space, equipment failures, asteroid storms, and the constant threat of death in the void. "Look at those ships," Lee said to his navigator, a former asteroid belt prospector named Kim. "Absolutely beautiful. Perfect lines, advanced armor, weapons that could probably vaporize us without breaking a sweat." Kim nodded, studying the Confederacy dreadnoughts through his binoculars. Each ship was a work of art, designed by beings who valued elegance and efficiency in equal measure. Their hulls gleamed with advanced materials, and their weapon arrays were precisely arranged for maximum effectiveness in traditional fleet engagements. "Too bad they're built wrong," Lee continued with a slight smile. "Those ships are designed to fight other honorable opponents in nice, clean battles with rules and formations. They're built for honor instead of winning." The communication system crackled to life, and Admiral Zenth's voice filled the bridge. Even through the translation software, his disappointment was obvious. The Admiral had been hoping for reinforcements that matched his own advanced fleet, ships with proper military design, trained crews, and the kind of firepower that could stand up to the Vorthak swarm in direct combat. Instead, he was looking at what appeared to be a fleet of glorified garbage trucks. "Earth vessels," Zenth's voice carried the weight of someone trying to be polite, while his world crumbled around him. "We appreciate your response to our distress call. However, I must inform you that the enemy force approaching significantly outmatches even our combined capabilities." Lee picked up the communication device, his voice calm and steady, as if he discussed hopeless military situations every day. "Admiral Zenth, this is Captain Lee. We understand the tactical situation. Request immediate transfer of all available data on enemy force composition, movement patterns, and previous engagement reports. There was something in Lee's tone that made Admiral Zenth pause. It wasn't bravado or false confidence. It was the voice of someone who had looked at impossible situations before and found ways to survive them. The casual way Lee requested tactical data, as if he was planning to actually fight rather than just die gloriously, made the Admiral's scales ripple with an emotion he couldn't quite identify. Hope, perhaps. Or maybe just confusion about what these strange humans thought they could accomplish with their converted industrial ships. The meeting room aboard Nexus Prime had never seen anything like this before. On one side sat the Confederacy's finest military minds, Admiral Zenth with his gleaming scales, Commander Thalys with his 4 perfectly coordinated arms, and a dozen other officers representing the 7 peaceful species of their alliance. Their uniforms were pristine, their bearing dignified, and their approach to warfare built on thousands of years of civilized military tradition. On the other side sat the humans, and they looked like they had just finished fixing a broken engine. Captain Song's jumpsuit still had grease stains on it. Captain Kim wore a patched jacket that had seen better decades. Their equipment was a mix of military surplus and improvised gear that somehow worked better than it had any right to. "Let me understand your previous engagements," Captain Song said, studying the holographic display that showed 43 destroyed worlds. "You faced the Vorthak in direct fleet-to-fleet combat, maintaining formation discipline and engaging at maximum weapons range." Admiral Zenth nodded proudly. Of course, standard military doctrine demands organized battle lines, coordinated fire patterns, and honorable engagement rules. The humans exchanged glances that the aliens couldn't quite interpret. It wasn't mockery, exactly, but something close to disbelief. "And how did that work out for you?" Captain Kim asked, gesturing at the display showing world after world consumed by the swarm. The question hung in the air like an accusation. Commander Thalys shifted uncomfortably. "We fought with honor. Our casualties were significant, but we maintained military tradition." Captain Song leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Admiral, with respect, honor doesn't matter if everyone dies. Your people called for help because traditional tactics aren't working. Maybe it's time to try something different." What followed was 6 hours of the most confusing military briefing in Confederacy history. The humans explained concepts that made the aliens' translators work overtime. Acceptable losses meant deliberately sacrificing some of your forces to achieve larger goals. Strategic retreat meant running away wasn't always cowardice. Sometimes it was the smartest thing you could do. But the part that really broke their understanding was when Captain Kim outlined the battle plan. "Your ships are faster and better, armed than ours," Kim explained, pointing at the tactical display. "So you'll engage the Vorthak head-on, full formation, just like they expect. Draw their attention, make them commit their forces." Admiral Zenth's scales rippled with confusion. "And then?" "Then you run," Captain Song said simply. "Lead them into the asteroid field where your speed advantage disappears. While they're chasing you, thinking they've won, we'll hit their flanks with everything we've got." The translator struggled with the human military terms, but the meaning was clear enough. Admiral Zenth's voice rose in shock. "You want us to use our advanced vessels as bait?" "Exactly," Kim nodded. "The Vorthak think in straight lines. See target, destroy target, move to next target. They won't expect their prey to be setting a trap." Commander Thalys spoke up, his 4 arms gesturing in distress. "This violates every principle of civilized warfare. We don't use deception. We don't run from fights. We certainly don't sacrifice ships as diversions." Captain Song's expression softened. "Commander, I understand this goes against everything you've been taught, but your way of fighting got 43 worlds killed. Our way might be ugly, but it keeps people alive." The room fell silent except for the hum of life support systems. Outside, sensors showed the Vorthak advance fleet was now less than 2 days away. Admiral Zenth looked at his officers, seeing the same desperate calculation in their eyes that he felt in his hearts. They could die with honor using traditional tactics, or they could try humanity's chaotic, undignified approach and maybe, just maybe, survive. "Very well," Zenth said finally. "We'll try your madness." The battle began exactly as Admiral Zenth had predicted it would, and exactly as the humans had planned it wouldn't. The Vorthak advance fleet dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their dark ships arranged in precise geometric patterns that spoke of cold, mechanical intelligence. They had done this same dance 43 times before, always with the same result: total victory. The Confederacy fleet moved forward to meet them just as they always did. Beautiful ships in elegant formations, their weapons charging with deadly precision. Admiral Zenth's flagship led the charge, its hull gleaming, under the light of distant stars. For a moment it looked like every other battle the Vorthak had fought, civilized opponents meeting them head-on in honorable combat. But then the humans attacked, and everything the Vorthak thought they knew about warfare went out the airlock. Instead of maintaining neat battle lines, the 18 human ships scattered like startled birds, each one moving in a different direction at different speeds. Their converted cargo haulers and mining vessels darted between the larger ships, too small and too fast for the Vorthak's main weapons to track effectively. Captain Park's ship, an old freight hauler called Busan Runner, took heavy damage early in the fight. His hull was breached in 3 places, his life support was failing, and his weapons were offline. By every rule of civilized warfare, he should have retreated to a safe distance and called for rescue. Instead, he did something that made Admiral Zenth's scales stand on end. "This is Park," his voice crackled over the communication system, calm as if he was reporting weather conditions. "I'm going to ram that big ugly cruiser. Everyone stay clear of the blast zone." The Confederacy officers watched in horror as the damaged human ship accelerated directly toward a Vorthak cruiser that outmassed it 10-1. At the last second, Park ejected in a tiny escape pod, his ship continuing on its collision course without him. The explosion was spectacular. The human freighter's reactor went critical just as it hit the cruiser's engine section, creating a chain reaction that not only destroyed the intended target, but also took out 2 nearby Vorthak destroyers that had been too close to the blast. 3. Enemy ships eliminated by 1 damaged cargo hauler and a man with no fear of death. But Park wasn't alone in his crazy tactics. All across the battlefield, human ships were doing things that defied military logic. Captain Yu used his mining laser to cut a Vorthak destroyer in half lengthwise. Captain No positioned his ship behind a chunk of space debris, then used it like a shield while firing missiles around the edges. Captain O actually turned off his engines and pretended to be dead, waiting until a Vorthak ship came close to investigate before unleashing everything he had at point-blank range. The humans didn't fight like a military force. They fought like a pack of wild animals that had somehow learned to use spaceships. They ignored formations, abandoned positions when it suited them, and used tactics that would have gotten them court-martialed in any civilized navy. And it was working. Admiral Zenth watched the chaos unfold from his command bridge, trying to understand what he was seeing. "Humans fight like they have nothing to lose," he observed to Captain Han, whose ship was somehow coordinating the madness. Han's response was simple and chilling. "We don't. That's why we win." The Vorthak advance fleet, confused and bleeding, retreated into hyperspace, but everyone knew this was just the beginning. The victory celebration was short-lived. Everyone knew the Vorthak advance fleet had only been a taste of what was coming. Intelligence reports showed the main swarm was just days away, bringing hundreds of ships that would make their recent battle look like a minor skirmish. If the combined human Confederacy force was going to survive, they needed to learn from each other fast. The training sessions that followed were unlike anything either side had ever experienced. In the cargo bays of Nexus Prime, Sergeant Cho gathered a group of Kaleth Marines around him. These alien soldiers were impressive, tall, graceful, with forearms that could handle multiple weapons simultaneously. They had been trained in traditional combat techniques that emphasized precision, discipline, and honor. Cho was about to teach them how to throw all of that out the nearest airlock. "Forget everything you know about fair fighting," he told them. "Floating in the zero-gravity training area. Fair fights are for people who want to die with clean consciences." He demonstrated how to use a broken piece of metal as a weapon, how to turn a damaged helmet into an explosive device, and how to fight when you were outnumbered, outgunned, and had nothing left except the will to take your enemy down with you. The Kaleth Marines watched with fascination and growing horror as this human showed them ways of fighting that their military academies had never even considered. Meanwhile, in the engineering sections, Jung was conducting his own kind of education. The alien technicians gathered around him were some of the brightest minds in the Confederacy, beings who had spent decades perfecting clean, efficient technology that worked exactly as designed. Jung was teaching them how to make things explode on purpose. Every reactor has safety systems, he explained, his hands deep in the guts of a power core. Your job is to figure out how to bypass all of them at exactly the right moment. The alien engineers looked nervous as Jung showed them how to rig overload sequences, how to turn cargo containers into makeshift bombs, and how to weaponize systems that were never meant to be weapons. Their advanced understanding of technology, combined with human creativity for destruction, was producing ideas that probably violated several interstellar treaties. Admiral Zenth observed all of this with growing unease. He watched human soldiers, laughing and joking while they demonstrated how to make deadly traps from spare parts. He saw his own people learning techniques that would have been considered war crimes just weeks ago. "Your people seem remarkably comfortable with violence," he commented to Captain Moon, who was sitting nearby, methodically cleaning a weapon that looked like it had been cobbled together from scrap metal. Moon looked up, her expression thoughtful. "We're not comfortable with violence, Admiral. We're comfortable with necessity. And sometimes, unfortunately, those two things end up being the same." She gestured toward the training areas where humans and aliens worked side by side. "Your people fought honorably for thousands of years, and it worked because you were fighting other honorable opponents. But the Vorthak don't care about honor. They don't follow rules, they just consume everything in their path." Zenth watched a group of his officers learning how to rig explosive booby traps, their tentacles working alongside human hands to twist wires and set timers. "So you're teaching us to become like them?" "No," Moon replied firmly. "We're teaching you to become like us. There's a difference between fighting dirty to survive and fighting dirty because you enjoy it. Humans learned a long time ago that sometimes you have to break rules to protect the people you care about. The cultural exchange was awkward and often uncomfortable. Confederacy officers struggled with concepts that went against millennia of civilized warfare, while humans tried to explain tactics without sounding like bloodthirsty savages. But it was working. When the main Vorthak fleet arrived, they would face enemies who had learned humanity's most dangerous lesson. Rules are for those who can afford to lose. The sensors screamed warnings across every ship in the Allied fleet, as space itself seemed to tear open. What emerged from hyperspace was beyond anything the defenders had imagined. The Vorthak main fleet didn't arrive in neat formations like civilized armies. They came like a swarm of mechanical death, 300 vessels of various sizes, stretching across space in a cloud of destruction that blotted out the stars. Captain Song stood on the bridge of her converted cargo hauler, watching the tactical display with grim determination. The numbers were clear and terrifying, 47 Allied ships against 300 enemy vessels. In any traditional military engagement, this wouldn't even be called a battle. It would be called a massacre. "All ships, remember the plan?" Song's voice crackled across the communication channels, reaching every human and alien crew member in the fleet. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything they had trained for. "We go home together or we don't go home at all." The battle that followed would be remembered by survivors as the most brutal engagement in galactic history. But it didn't start the way anyone expected. Instead of charging forward in heroic formation, the Allied fleet scattered like leaves in a hurricane. Admiral Zenth's flagship, which had once been the pride of the Confederacy Navy, now darted between asteroids like a smuggler running from patrol ships. His crew, trained for generations in honorable warfare, found themselves using rocks as shields and pretending their weapons were broken to trick enemies into coming closer. Captain Kim's mining vessel Incheon Dream actually shut down all its systems and played dead, floating silently among the debris of a destroyed cargo ship. When a Vorthak destroyer came to investigate what looked like an easy salvage opportunity, Kim's crew unleashed a barrage of mining charges that had been rigged to work like military torpedoes. The Confederacy ships, abandoning centuries of military tradition, fought with a cunning that would have horrified their ancestors. They coordinated attacks that looked suicidal, but were actually carefully planned chaos. 3 Kaleth cruisers would engage a Vorthak formation head-on, drawing fire and attention, while 2 human freighters circled around to attack from blind spots that shouldn't have existed. But the Vorthak were not the mindless machines everyone had hoped they were. As the battle raged on, the alien swarm began to adapt to these new tactics. They started setting their own traps, using damaged ships as bait, just like the humans had taught the Confederacy. They learned to expect attacks from unexpected angles, and began coordinating their responses in ways that countered the Allied fleet's chaotic strategies. One by one, the Allied ships began to fall. Captain O's vessel Daegu Runner took a direct hit to its reactor and exploded in a ball of blue fire. The Confederacy cruiser Harmony of Worlds broke apart under concentrated fire, its elegant hull no match for the overwhelming firepower directed against it. The survivors found themselves scattered across the battlefield, their communications jammed, their formations broken. Ships leaked atmosphere into space like bleeding wounds, and the tactical displays showed more red contacts than anyone wanted to count. Captain Song looked around her damaged bridge, where half her crew was injured and most of her systems were failing. Outside, the battle continued to rage, but it was clear that humanity's unconventional tactics could only do so much against overwhelming numbers. The giants were falling, and there seemed to be no way to stop it. The soul's pride was dying. Captain Lee could feel it in the way his ship shuddered with each movement, hear it in the grinding of damaged machinery, and see it in the faces of his crew as they worked desperately to keep basic systems running. The hull had been breached in 12 different places, sealed with emergency patches that wouldn't hold much longer. Half his crew was injured, and the other half was running on pure determination and recycled air. Lee stood at his command station, one hand gripping the rail to steady himself as his ship lurched through space. Through the cracked viewport, he could see the massive Vorthak command vessel, a nightmare of dark metal and pulsing energy that coordinated the entire enemy fleet. It was easily 10 times the size of his converted mining ship, protected by shields and armor that could probably withstand a direct hit from a Confederacy dreadnought. But Lee had noticed something during the battle. Every time the command ship moved, the rest of the Vorthak fleet moved with it. Every tactical decision seemed to flow from that single vessel. If they could somehow take it out, maybe the rest of the swarm would lose coordination. "Captain," his engineer called from across the bridge, her voice strained but steady. "We've got maybe 10 minutes of life support left, and the reactor's running hot. We could overload it, but we'd have to get close enough to make it count," Lee finished for her. He looked around at his crew, miners and cargo haulers, who had volunteered to fight a war they had no business being part of. They were scared, he could see that, but none of them were backing down. Lee activated the fleet communication system, knowing this would probably be the last time he spoke. To his fellow humans, "This is Soul's pride to all remaining vessels. We're going to make a run at their command ship. Our reactor's critical, and we're going to ram it straight down their throat." The response came immediately from ships scattered across the battlefield. Captain Song's voice, calm despite the chaos around her. "Lee, that's suicide. You'll never make it through their defenses." "Maybe not," Lee admitted, watching the command ship grow larger in his viewport as they accelerated toward it. "But if we can take out their coordination, maybe the rest of you can finish this fight. Don't let our sacrifice be meaningless." What happened next would be talked about in military academies for generations. Admiral Zenth, watching from his damaged flagship, saw the small human vessel begin its desperate charge toward the Vorthak command ship. For a moment he was frozen by the enormity of what he was witnessing. Beings he had known for only days, willing to die for people they had just met. Then something inside the Admiral broke, or maybe something was finally fixed. Against every regulation in the Confederacy military code, against the direct orders of his superiors, and against all logic, Zenth activated his ship's engines and turned toward the enemy command vessel. "Where humans go, the Confederacy follows," he announced over the fleet communications, his voice carrying a certainty that surprised even him. One by one, other ships began to turn. Commander Thalis brought his cruiser around, its weapons charging for what would surely be their final battle. Captain Moon's damaged freighter, barely holding together, limped after them. 7 other vessels, a mix of human cargo haulers and Confederacy warships, formed an impromptu formation behind the dying soul's pride. It wasn't a tactical maneuver that would be found in any military textbook. It was 9 ships, crewed by beings from different worlds, united by the simple idea that no one should die alone. The combined charge hit the Vorthak command vessel like a hammer blow. The Soul's Pride's reactor went critical just as it breached, the enemy's shields creating an explosion that tore through the command ship's hull. The other vessels followed, pouring everything they had into the gap Lee had created. When the command ship finally exploded, something extraordinary happened. Across the battlefield, the remaining Vorthak vessels suddenly stopped. The memorial gardens on New Calith were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Instead of the traditional solemn monuments that marked most war memorials, these gardens celebrated life alongside death. Flowers from 7 different worlds bloomed together, their colors creating patterns that could be seen from orbit. At the center stood 2 statues, one human, one alien, their hands clasped in friendship. Captain Lee's statue showed him as he had been in life, wearing a patched jumpsuit, standing confidently with his hand on the shoulder of Admiral Zenth's bronze figure. The alien admiral was depicted not in his formal military pose, but in the moment he had chosen to follow the humans into certain death. The inscription beneath, written in dozens of languages, simply read, "They answered the call." But these weren't the only memorials. On every world the Confederacy had rebuilt, similar monuments had appeared. Some were grand affairs with eternal flames and formal ceremonies. Others were simple plaques in small towns, thanking the humans who had come when no one else would. Children who had never seen Earth learned the names of the volunteers who had saved their families. The memorials served another purpose too. They reminded everyone of the lessons learned from humanity's unconventional approach to warfare. Confederacy military academies now taught courses on adaptive tactics and asymmetric warfare. Young officers studied the Battle of Nexus Prime not just as a historical event, but as a fundamental change in how civilized species thought about conflict. Captain Song, now an admiral in the combined human Confederacy fleet, often visited these memorials during her travels. She would stand quietly, remembering friends who had volunteered for a mission they barely understood, fighting for people they had just met. The cost had been high. Nearly half the human volunteers had died in the battle, but their sacrifice had saved billions of lives across 7 worlds. The real test of the new alliance came 6 months after the Vorthak War ended. Pirates had been raiding the outer colonies, taking advantage of the chaos following the swarm's defeat. These weren't the mindless destroyers that the Vorthak had been. They were organized criminals who used hit-and-run tactics and hostage situations to avoid direct confrontation. When the attacks escalated to the point where entire colony ships were disappearing, the Confederacy faced a choice. They could handle this crisis alone using their rebuilt fleets and new tactical knowledge, or they could do something that would have been unthinkable before the humans arrived. They could ask for help. The message that went out from Confederacy space wasn't the desperate galaxy-wide plea they had sent during the Vorthak crisis. Instead, it was a direct transmission to Earth, sent on frequencies that only human equipment could receive. "We need our allies again. Pirates are threatening civilian populations in the Outer Rim. Can you assist?" The response came back in less than 12 hours, and it wasn't from Earth's official military command. Instead, it came from volunteer groups across human space, mining colonies, cargo haulers, even passenger ships that had been converted for military use. "This is Captain Park of the New Busan Mining Collective," the first message read. "We're loading up medical supplies and defensive equipment. Expected arrival in your space in 3 weeks." More messages followed throughout the day. "This is the Independent Traders Association. We've got 17 ships ready to help with evacuation operations." "Mars Colonial Fleet reporting. We can provide orbital support and fighter escorts." "Deep Space Salvage Union here. If you need ships repaired or pirates tracked, we're your people." By the end of the week, Over 200 human vessels had volunteered for the anti-piracy operation. They came not because their governments ordered them to, not because they expected payment or territory in return, but because someone had called for help. Captain Song stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the combined human Confederacy fleet prepare to depart for the Outer Rim. The sight would have been impossible to imagine just months earlier. Sleek alien warships flying alongside, converted cargo haulers, their crews working together with the easy familiarity of old friends. "Admiral," her communications officer called, "we're receiving transmissions from across Confederacy space. Every world is sending messages of support." Song smiled as she listened to the voices. Children singing traditional songs from their homeworlds, elders offering blessings in ancient languages, and ordinary citizens simply saying thank you in dozens of different ways. The galaxy was no longer silent. When someone called for help, others answered. And that simple truth had changed everything. A coordinated attacks and began fleeing in random directions. Their fleet coordination completely shattered.